There's a growing wave of popular speakers and scholars, presumably Islamic, promoting coffee as a support for worship and spirituality, with publicly available popular videos and blogs contributing to spreading this narrative. One well-known speaker, when asked about insomnia and sleep, remarked, "Insomnia, there's no insomnia for the Muslim. Insomnia just means you're supposed to be up doing things. It's a gift from Allah." People used to love that. They didn't feel tired at night. They used to praise Allah for that state. He then goes on to praise coffee as a blessing and referenced Yemeni Sufi Abu Hassan Ashadidi al-Yemeni. Actually, what I heard was Yahya Ashadidi, who is said to have discovered coffee as a means to stay awake for tahajjud. Another speaker described how du'as are traditionally composed for coffee preparation, invoking blessings not only for those who cultivated and consumed it, but for all Muslims across time, thus transforming a mundane act of preparation and drinking into a spiritual connection with Allah, His Messenger, and humanity. Many such statements are frequently cited and quoted in today's religious coffee-loving circles. I didn't know about it, but someone mentioned to me that in April of 2025, there is a public talk, "Was Coffee Once Forbidden? A 500-year-old debate." I heard about this from Sheikh Abdurrahman, our Sheikh. He said that at the beginning, the Malikis were all against coffee, because qahwa means wine in the Arabic language, in the ancient Arabic language. And the Maliki principle is anything that bears the name of something haram is haram. And so they were for the tahrim of qahwa because of that. Like the khanazir al-bahr, the hippopotamus, is not eaten according to the Maliki fiqh principles because it's a khanazir, it's a khanzir, or the khanzir al-bahr, excuse me, and so forth. And in January 2024, another public talk called "The Evolving Fatwas on Coffee." And on November 2023, 9 health benefits of coffee, history of coffee, easy coffee recipe, more and more. And then February 2022, Muslims popularized coffee. Coffee was often associated with religious activity. Sufis drank it at their devotional gatherings and nightly meditations, and so forth, 2022, 2021, and on back. And so all of these existed. This is the first part of the question. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about was the words of Sheikh Abdurrahman quoting Sheikh Abdul Ghani al-Nabulsi. He said, "Jahilta qadraka ayyuhal insanu." He said, "Have you proven ignorant of your true worth, O human being? And antal jamia wa ba'duka al-akwanu." He said, "You are the entirety, and all the created things are but part of it, are but part of you." And so I wanted to talk about the religious activities and I think what we know about. I know something about coffee. My easy coffee recipe long ago and far away. The most expensive coffee in Kodiak was Kona Gold from Hawaii. And so I bought some cans of it and opened it up and put the aluminum coffee pot on the table, or on the stove, on the diesel flat top steel stove with the little things that hold the pots on when the weather goes like this and like this. It's on a ship stove. And I got the water boiling and then threw a handful of coffee in it. I never measured. And so then it would boil up and I would snatch it off the stove before it ran over and it would foam and foam and foam. And then I'd put a glass of like a small teacup, of cold water in it. And then the grounds would settle down to the bottom and it would leave some of the blackest and most powerful coffee anywhere. The occasion, the place and time was herring season in the early spring. And we were trying to make lots of money. So we went to Prince William Sound first, which is before the Valdez crashed and made an oil slick and ruined Prince William Sound for quite a few years. And Exxon, I don't know if they paid the bill or not, but Lloyd's paid the bill for the ship anyway. And so, but this was before that, and we didn't see anything to fish that we put our net around. And so we went to Togiak. We went back to Kodiak, and we went to Togiak. That's a long ways out on the Bering Sea. and around Walrus Island and Round Island and other places up there, and to fish herring. And so we were all drinking the coffee that I was preparing, and there wasn't much else to do. I bought some ivory and was working filing some beads and some other things to make out of the ivory. It wasn't elephant ivory, it was mastodon ivory. And so it wasn't illegal because mastodons are already extinct. And so it could be bought and sold. I think it was about $80 a pound or something. So I was using files and things to work it and to see what I could make while we were out there doing nothing for 34 days, just about. We made a couple sets, but it didn't pan out so great. Anyway, I was out washing the coffee pot, and we were trying to conserve our water. And so I leaned over the rail and swished it in, and suddenly a wave took it out of my hand. And you talk about a panic attack. A coffee pot. I felt like diving in after it. And so anyway, we got the skipper to hit the reverse and go back, and the coffee pot filled halfway up with seawater and righted itself like a little boat, floating in there. And so we knocked it closer to the boat with a plunging pole and got it back aboard, and then we had our coffee again, saved in the nick of time. So in the stacks of Regenstein Library, I was going to the University of Chicago at the time. I used to sit in the stacks to do my work like most of the people. They had stacks, not just computer files in those days. And I happened to sit on the fourth floor in a place where they kept all of the translations of Sufi books. And so I was, being kind of a lazy person, I would stray over from my work. I was supposed to be writing. They wanted you to write publishable stuff. That was the bottom line in humanities at the University of Chicago at that time. And so we did a lot of writing, and so we needed privacy to do it and so forth. But in between times, I would look up and I would see something and that would catch my attention. So I was familiar with these Yemeni things about coffee and dervishes and Sufis and so forth, and I read about them there. And in the later days, I actually went to Yemen. We went down to visit Habib Omar 4 times, 3 times with my wife and 1 time with Amjad Rashid, who is a great teacher of fiqh, Shafi'i fiqh now in this country, has his own mahad and so forth, to introduce him to the people in Yemen. That's why I went down with him. And so we found ourselves in Sana'a, and the next plane was, I guess, to Muqadda or someplace, or Sayun. I don't know if it was the airplane or airport was open at that time. But and we found ourselves in a Hadra. And so a Yemeni Hadra, everything that the Yemenis do has a sort of energy to it. And so they're doing the Hadra, and right in the middle of the Hadra, somebody who had glazed eyes pulled off his upper shirt, and he pulled out his gambia, or jambia, big curved knife that they wear in their belts, just in case anybody gets fresh. And the Habayib have sworn them off for the last 400 years or so. And that's why you never see any of the Habayib, Habib Omar or Habib Mashur, or any of the Habayib with knives. But the other Yemenis have not sworn them off. So here he is, and he starts sort of lacerating. He pushes somebody, and it looked like he was just electrified. And his eyes were bulging and also glazed. And he came and pushed somebody, and somebody pushed him back, and he was all the more, cranked. And then he started slashing his back with the knife over his shoulder like this. And his skin was so tensed or something like this that the gambia didn't cut it. And so I looked at it, and then I remembered a word that I had read someplace about somebody giving some advice to his son when his son was headed off to the army. He said, well, Dad, I'm not very courageous. And he says, well, just act courageous and nobody will know the difference. And so when I remembered that, I smiled, and so here's this guy, working on his back, and I was smiling. And so Amjad Rashid looked at me, and he thought I was the most courageous person he'd ever heard of. And as it turned out, it was just part of the Hadra. So this is, a religious activity of sorts. The man was Yukhazin, as the Yemenis say, he's loading. In other words, he's chewing khat. And khat is a epinephrine-like drug. Epinephrine is like adrenaline. And so he was chewing khat, and he had a big lump in the side of his cheek that denoted that he'd been chewing it for a while and adding and adding and adding. They called it yukhazin, or kind of storing or something. Loading, maybe, would be the better translation for it. So this is a religious event of some sort. And they were using stimulants, they were using khat. And so, but in general, my entire belief is that the destiny of man and the highest specimens of human beings who exist are the ones whose hearts are attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in order to attach your heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you have to be detached from a lot of particulars that don't really concern you. This is my entire thing. In order to fulfill the high destiny of a human being, they have to be with Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the context, so as to speak, of everything. He, and only He, is the one who created everything. And so this is a certain, and the deep dhikr, that is a means that someone whose joy is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is someone who experiences infinite joy. And this is what I believe, and this is what I know, and this is what I have taken from all of those who have heard their qasidas and so forth of the Sufiya. And so this is the real heart of the issue, is finding Allah closer to you than your very self. When I first took the tariq from Sheikh Abdurrahman in January 1982. I knew all of this stuff about coffee, and so I was busy getting coffee and making coffee and seeing if I could stay up all night on coffee and so forth, because I read the stories and so forth. And I had it seems like it was a reutilized beer stein, about a pint, and I used to fill that up and have some coffee, and then proceed to try to make thicker. And try high and try low and try hard and try it easy and try any way you try it. But when you drink a bit of coffee that's just sufficiently strong, all you can do is iterate particulars. And the talk goes on and on and on and on and on in one's mind. And the talking mind is known to the Sufiya as the nafs. And so it's a great augmentation of the nafs. But the ruh is, as Jalaluddin Rumi talks about the prisoners who are all locked in the same cell, and every 24 hours they get a plate of chow pushed under the door. It's not enough for everybody, and so the biggest, toughest, fattest of them all would say, "Kulu washrabu hani'an," and he would jump on it and eat it all up. And the other poor prisoners weren't big enough to stop him, and he was the toughest and naturally stronger from eating all the time. This is Jalaluddin Rumi's symbol for the aggressive nafs that always gets what it wants. And the poor ruh never gets anything whatsoever, and so it gets weaker and weaker and weaker because the nafs is always after it's what it wants. And so Sheikh Abdurrahman, I was telling him about some of my coffee adventures, and he said, leave coffee. He said, don't drink any more coffee. He said, coffee is associated with disease. And he would drink coffee socially. If he'd go to somebody's house and they put out these little, 40 milliliter finjan for people to drink sweet coffee, and just to be a polite guest. But for me, he said, there's nothing in it for your tariq. And so this was the Shadli of my life. And he said, no coffee. And it proved, he said, and so I left it. And that was the first year that I was with him. It was in 1982. And so I wanted to note a couple of things. The first thing is that, as I discovered, and I defy anybody else to make it work, they could have a spiritual activity if it's kind of like the Yemeni Hadra, where everybody's just jumping around and doing things that don't require. But as for focusing on the divine, focusing on infinitude, it's not possible when your attention is caught up by individual things, and the individual remarks never stop. It's like I don't know what, a nagging wife. As the Egyptians say, a pecker, who is never quiet, always commenting, always commenting. This is the kind of nafs you get from drinking coffee and hoping it'll do something for your dhikr. Forget it, guys and gals and everybody else. No. And all stimulants, in general, we had a man that came to tell us about drugs when we were in high school, down from Davenport to Odessa. And it was, he had slides and so forth in the presentation. And he said, all stimulants, he said, a word of wisdom that I haven't heard anybody else say these days. He said, all stimulants cause premature aging. And this is the truth. You look at somebody that's on stimulants, their skin is old before its time, and their eyes are old before their time, so their energy is old before then, their mitochondria is tired before their times, and so forth and so forth. And their mind is not far behind. And so all stimulants cause premature aging. The clot, you can tell the people when they're loaded because of the filmy look on their eyes. Unfortunately, there's a cultural deal in Yemen where if you don't bring clot to your wedding, you're bakhil. You're a cheapskate. And they'd rather be anything than a cheapskate, the Yemenis. And so there's, fuqaha have kind of chickened out. It makes your stomach into stone, basically, and ruins all of the stimulants ruin the body in general. And so khat is also, khat, whether it's khat or whether it's coke, or whether it's crack, smokable coke, or whether it's methamphetamine, or whether it's coffee or whether it's tea, all of these things cause premature aging. And we'll tell you why in a minute. And so stimulants stimulate the nafs, and not the aql and not the ruh. It's good, therefore, for repetitive tasks. And it's good for recounting ideas, like authors like Henry Kissinger, whose works about global strategy reflect their current readings at the time they were writing the article and things like this. Superficial analyses and morticious research and commentary. And so I got out of it when I was in 1982 and haven't touched the stuff since. And I don't know, people can judge my work, but I've been a translator and a writer since that time and earned my living thereby. And I haven't used the stuff, and it didn't seem to harm any of the writing. I can write as fast as the next person, inshallah ta'ala. But it does hinder the motion of the dhikr al-haqiqi, the true, real dhikr that the Sufis have to have in order to be for Allah and with Allah and through Allah, billah. And so and some people, on the other hand, are addicts, and they can only get to their base setting by drinking something, taking some caffeine. So that's a little bit different. So the movement of the Sufi, if I may be allowed to judge, is the proceeding from the hiss, or that which is physically palpable, and that which is subject to the senses, like touch and hearing and seeing and so forth. This is the hiss. From the hiss to the ma'na. The ma'na is the larger context, namely Allah's attributes and Allah's immensitude and Allah's sovereignty and Allah's jalal and Allah's jamal and so forth. And to go from the one to the other is not an easy task. You need all of your facilities. You need all of your faculties, and especially peace of heart. And peace of heart, you can find whatever ads you like for coffee, but the one claim they never make is peace of heart. It's, rough and tough and up to snuff, everything else. I know, but it's not there. And so, and it's from the hiss to the mana, from the abstract, which is individual things, to the concrete, so as to speak, which is Allah. From the less real to the more real. Because everything else is dependent upon Him. It only exists because of His creative fiat, being at every moment, and it is. And to the insan to Ar-Rahman. And so this movement, I don't believe that it's possible. And it's not possible for a human being to reach their full potential with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the key to why the human being is insan. Insan is because he is capable of uns bidahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so somebody who's on stimulants is only capable of listening to his nefs talk, whether you like it or not. And this has a connection. And so, well, what are we supposed to do? What can we, when I was in Kodiak also, they legalized pot. And so, it was one of the first states that did so, and it wasn't a government pot that causes hallucinations and 4 consecutive weeks of vomiting to the people that become addicted to it, like the stuff they sell in Washington State today. But rather, it was the old contraband that they always had before, and they made it legalized within one's domicile. And so the fishermen's wives who had houses up there, when the fishermen were out, shrimp fishermen or herring fishermen or whatever fishermen, would smoke pot, to amuse themselves. Well, it's harmless. Everybody knows that. It's far from harmless, but they felt that everybody knows that. And so they all came down with all sorts of weird illnesses, psychological and physical. The pot, unfortunately, it stays in the fat. It's a fat-soluble thing that stays in the fat after you quit it for months, 2 or 3 months before it gets out. And so they had a real big problem. And so a herbalist hung his shingle out in Seattle. And so one of them went down and they looked him up and he said, quit smoking it. And it got better. And that's what he told all of them. They came down to it one after kept saving lives by saying, quit smoking this stuff, quit smoking this stuff. And so they all got better. And what is there to take the place of coffee, one might ask? And my suggestion is, there are several things that can really energize a person. And I can think of 3 of them right off the top of my head. We can really energize the mind. One is a good heavy workout that does not exhaust you. The right weights and not too many lifts. And why? Because the brain has to electrify the muscles, has to send a charge to the muscles so they can lift something a great deal more than they're used to lifting. And so the brain energizing the muscles, you find for the rest of the day, you find a mind that is very clear and very energized and very capable of memorizing things at a flash. And there's hardly any limit to its creativeness. And so this really energizes it, a 20-minute, 30-minute workout, even something like this. And so this is one of the things I find. Another one that never fails is just the right amount of food when you're really hungry. And that makes a person feel, like they could rip apart anything in the world. It really energizes the whole system. When somebody's really hungry and they get just the amount of food that they need, the right kind of food. And so that also empowers. And of the most important is that which the Prophet ﷺ used in his tahajjud. And that is the Prophet ﷺ, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم from Aisha in the Sahih, كان ينام من أول الليل ويحيي آخره. The Prophet ﷺ, he used to go to sleep from the very first of the night. Right after Isha, off he would go and pass into sleep. And then he would get up at the end of the night and bring it to life with prayer and with tahajjud. And try it sometime after you have, 4 hours of sleep, 5 hours of sleep, 3.5 hours of sleep, and get up and you'll find that your focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is total. There's no problem whatsoever in focusing on the words of the Quran that you're saying in your tahajjud and in your tadarruk, you're humbling yourself before Allah in your sujood and making dua, and in your dhikr after your tahajjud before Fajr comes. And in all of these, you find a mind that is absolutely and perfectly clear. And there's nothing more that you can no more stimulating a thing that you can possibly ask for than any of these 3 things. And these are readily available. And getting up in the morning, if you need something hot, have some bone broth. If you drank bone broth 365 mornings of the year, your stomach would be in excellent shape. You wouldn't have stomach or intestinal problems at all. In other words, all things being equal. And so, Nasallallahu tawfiq wa taysir. Okay, so we'll get on to the proper business. This is from Michael Pollan's book, This is Your Brain on Plants. He talks about the vendetta of law enforcement agencies against the opium and opioids. And he talks about coffee And he talks about one other thing that slips my mind. He said, ordinarily I walk through the airport during my months of abstention. He quit using coffee. And he said, ordinarily I'll walk through the airport through my months of abstention, he calls it, filled me with yearning and envy as I rolled past one aromatic caffeine opportunity after another. But matters look very different to a reformed addict first thing in the morning. One such morning, having hauled myself out of bed to the airport for a 6 a.m. flight, fueled on nothing but peppermint tea, I registered only pity as I beheld the lines snaking in front of Starbucks and Pete's. Lines so long that it would easily take a half an hour for these poor wretches to get served. I could see they were enduring the first symptoms of caffeine withdrawal, and their desperation to head them off and return to baseline consciousness carried a whiff of pathos. Sorrow. They looked like better-dressed versions of the addicts I had seen in Amsterdam, lining up in front of a mobile dispensary for their morning fix. I have heroin. Of opiates. I thought to myself, these people are pathetic. So, Nasallah tawfiq wa taysir. And he also wrote, he says, caffeine is not the sole cause of our sleep crisis. Screens, alcohol, which is on hard as REM sleep, is on caffeine on deep sleep. Pharmaceuticals, work schedules, noise and light pollution, anxiety, and also radiation, all of these play a role in undermining both the duration and quality of our sleep. Sleep is of the utmost importance, as we'll mention. But as Matt Walker says, if you plot the rise in the number of Starbucks coffee houses over the past 35 years and the rise in sleep deprivation over that period, the lines look very similar, he said. Matthew Walker is a professor of neuroscience and psychology at UC Berkeley. He has 100 studies, etc. Okay, now we get down to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, La darar wala dirar. He said there is no harming somebody or harming one back. And Imam Nawawi says the Zahir al-Hadith, he says what the extensive purport of the Hadith, what it means, is that it's everything that harms is haram, and everything that is probably harmful is makruh, or tahrim kull anwa' min ad-darar. Okay, among the khasa'is, or the particularities of coffee, is, we'll take it step by step through the body. First, the nervous system. Coffee impairs your body's ability to rest. The caffeine in coffee blocks fatigue signals, adenosine diphosphate. As we told some of you before, the basic energy source of all life on Earth is ATP, adenine triphosphate, and when it breaks the chemical bond, it releases energy into the organism. The synthesis of ATP is by photosynthesis, and the animals eat the plants, and then and so they have ATP is the fuel, the basic stuff that gives energy to every form of life on Earth, just about, except very few. And ADP is after it breaks its bond and releases its energy, it is spent until it's fixed up again and made into ATP. It's called the Krebs cycle, as you may have learned in 8th grade, as I did. So what caffeine in the coffee does is it breaks there are receptors on the cells in your brain that can tell when the ADP, the depleted version, is up. When there are high levels of this in the blood. What does it do then? It makes you tired and sleepy, so you could go back and fix yourself up by sleeping. And so caffeine blocks this. The ADP sensors are blocked by caffeine. So that's how it gives you such a lift. And so the default setting is that the thyroid is supposed to be the boss about who does what in the energy of the body, and not cortisol. There's a young man here who got very enthused, one of the young guys, who got very enthused with energy drinks, which contain all sorts of stuff, among them lots and lots of caffeine. And so I finally got a hold of him, and I said, "Here, just let me talk to you for a minute." I said, "This caffeine, the stuff that you're drinking is packed with, produces cortisol." And I said, "Well, what is cortisol?" I said, "Cortisol is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created from your endocrine system, that when you walk into a room, so you walk into a bedroom, and you flick on the light, and all of a sudden, what do you see? You see a lion in the middle of the room, and it's looking at you like a menu item. And what happens? you get a huge shock, and your body just releases all of the cortisol, and the liver releases its sugar stores. And it prepares you to give the lion a whipping, or else run as fast as you can to escape him, one of the two. And I said, so this is not a normal state of affairs. And I said, one of the things that it also does is there are cortisol sensors on all of the immune particles of the body, the white blood cells and all of the neutrophils and leukocytes and killer T cells and the other players. They all have cortisone receptors. And what do they do when the cortisone receptors is touched by cortisone? They switch off. So all of your immune defenses switch off when there's cortisol. And why? Because they're not needed. And what else is cortisol good for? Cortisol goes to your tissues. And if you have somebody that's just stressed out beyond imagining, and the stress lasts day after day after day, he's between a rock and a hard place, and he just can't, they're dropping explosives on him from above, and he doesn't have any Dean, for example, whatever it may be. And they're just stressed out. The cortisone tries to find more sugar, and so that you can fight the antagonist. And when it doesn't find sugar, it makes sugar. Out of what? Out of your muscles, out of your gut lining, out of your connective tissue between your bones, out of the bones themselves, and out of your nervous system. Everything it touches, it converts into glucose for the fight. And so if you can imagine this, and so you've got something, we have a saying in England, well, what's eating him? The answer, if something's eating him, it's the cortisone. It eats up the tissue in order to produce sugar and so for the fight, for the big event. Okay, caffeine stimulates cortisol production. So we're not talking about that now. We're talking about it's switching off also and so anyway, I talked to the young man, and he says, I've already quit it since now. And so anyway, he said he wasn't going to drink it for the nonce. So once the caffeine wears off, the accumulated ADP, in other words, there's lots of ADP because you've stalled it. You haven't gone to sleep and fixed yourself up or anything. You've stalled it because of your caffeine adventures. And over time, the ADP hits the brain all at once and causing a crash after a period of high energy. Well, time for another cup of coffee. Unfortunately, that's the idea. But over time, the body may compensate for regular blockages by building more ADP receptors in the brain. And if it builds some more of them, you'll have to shut off more in order to have its effect. This, in turn, creates oversensitivity to ADP in the body and decreased sensitivity to caffeine, requiring higher doses to recreate previous stimulatory effects. It takes more and more to get you off on your caffeine jerk. So caffeine not only prevents your organs from resting. Why? Because it shuts them down. The autonomic system shuts off everything that isn't absolutely necessary. Everything besides breathing. You'll quit digesting when there's cortisone in the wind down there. And you'll quit, everything will stop in order for that wife to ready you for the fight or to run away. And so it works like $1 million and has for tens of thousands of years or longer. And so it prevents your organs from resting, but it also hits your sleep schedule, obviously. It disrupts the circadian rhythm through the same method of inhibiting ADP receptors. This increases light sensitivity and sleep latency, the time it takes to fall asleep, further impacting your sleep quality because your brain is not registering that you're tired. You may assume that the above would only result in increased tiredness, but the actual effect is actually far more detrimental. Your brain, under normal conditions, produces significant amounts of waste. This is what we talked about before. Who needs sleep after all? Well, not Ronald Reagan or Margaret Thatcher. They used to brag about their ability to only sleep a couple hours a night, and off they would go, fit as a fiddle and ready to go. Both of them got Alzheimer's. And it's no coincidence, because the body, and they didn't know this until 2013, actually. The body, it shuts you off at night, and the sympathetic nerve, or the parasympathetic nervous system, causes your whole body to relax. And one of the effects of this is the brain cells themselves diminish by about 40%. And for what purpose? And so the cerebrospinal fluid can go in between the brain cells, and by special glial cells called astrocytes, will pull out the junk protein. Where every time you have a synapse, every time the brain signals from one cell to another of its many cells, indeed, something burns out, and there's garbage afterwards. And so the brain sheds by this process, the process of taking the junk matter out and transferring it to the cerebral spinal fluid, which transmits it to the thalamus, and the thalamus sends it to the kidneys, and it's urinated out. And you lose your brain might weigh about 3 pounds. You lose about 3 pounds of waste per year out of it. And if you don't lose that waste by your body flushing it out in delta sleep, deep sleep, in other words, it has to happen. Otherwise, the body doesn't relax to that degree where it moves out the garbage. If that doesn't happen, then the garbage builds up. And it looks like a garbage man strike. I don't know if any of you are old enough to have seen a garbage man strike in the town, but it looks like a mess after a couple of days because the garbage carriers have the populace over the barrel if they're not working. And so they get their hike in wages, or they used to. And so what we get when the garbage is never cleaned out because you never have a decent sleep is Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and dementia. And, So your brain produces significant amounts of waste, some of which are toxic enough to cause Alzheimer's disease. However, under the influence of caffeine, which increases cortisol levels, metabolic processes become artificially inflated, generating more brain waste. This is from a study in 2005. Your brain normally excretes the excess weight by employing a complex system known as the glymphatic system, which operates from glial cells and lymphatic, which operates during deep sleep. But with increased cortisol levels caused by caffeine intake as well as blockage of ADP receptors, you are raising the risk of neurodegenerative diseases by restricting your ability to remove toxins from your brain. Okay, this is neurological. The detox system, the same defenders that are defending you from pathogens, from viruses, and from germs, also remove toxins from your cells. And so coffee worsens your exposure to toxins. It also, the cortisol will also stop the things that export the toxins out of your body and clean you up. When coffee is consumed, caffeine enters your bloodstream. It also signals your liver to turn on a unique enzyme designed to remove the stimulant from your body. This is from a 2025 study. Lydiker and Schellem. This enzyme is called CYP1A2, and though it is released for the removal of caffeine, it also has an ironic secondary function. It transforms the toxic compounds found in cigarette smoke and air pollution and artificial air fresheners, the kind that they spray around to make the place smell, into more harmful versions. And I know. Simply stated, daily consumption of coffee magnifies the effect of toxins in the body, from the mundane to the more worrisome, from wrinkles, stained teeth, and cavities to vascular lining and neurological damage, and even cancers. Cardiovascular system. Blood flow is critical to your survival. Poor cerebral blood flow, is linked to chronic age-related diseases, including dementia and Alzheimer's. One of the critical molecules that help regulate blood flow is ADP, the same compound coffee blocks from reaching your brain. ADP dilates cerebral blood cells, facilitating sufficient oxygen flow to the brain and efficient waste removal. So ADP has a good function. It stimulates the vasculature, the arteries and veins in your brain to expand, and so they can get what they need. And so when the ADP stimulates this, so it's not just an off product, it doesn't do anything. So it dilates cerebral blood vessels, facilitating sufficient oxygen flow to the brain and efficient waste removal. However, by blocking ADP receptors and inhibiting its natural vasodilatory effects, its ability to expand blood vessels, coffee reduces brain flow by 27%. Adicott et al. And his co-workers in 2009. These are studies. We'll put all of the references, inshallah, up after this, after I finish. This not only causes oxygen deprivation in the brain, but reduces the lymphatic system's efficiency, which relies on brain artery pulsations to flux toxins from the central nerving system. As a matter of fact, this cerebral spinal fluid, how does it get up there, or the lymph, how does it get up to the brain? It gets up there because there is a perivasculature of the vessels that go to the brain. In other words, there's no pump for the cerebral spinal fluid, but there's a second layer of vessel around the blood vessels, around the arteries that go to the brain. And the movement of the heart in pumping the blood makes little waves on the inner one, and the stuff in the outer one, which is the stuff that washes the brain, gets up there because of the movement of the heart. So both blood is pumped, and then there's a perivasculature, another layer of, a larger tube that pumps the stuff up. And so when you constrict if you drink coffee and you constrict the vasculature, it also diminishes the efficiency of the washing out of the brain. By this means that the lymphatic system's efficiency, which relies on brain artery pulsations to flux toxins out. As we mentioned, there's a second set of vessel wall but the outer one carries not blood, but carries the washing out fluid. And it uses the heart's motion of the stuff inside to carry it along and up. And so this is also impaired. So you're from the flush toxins from the central nervous system, the brain. As such, without efficient artery function, your brain has to adapt to the oxygen-depleted environment and buildup of dangerous a buildup of dangerous chemicals ensues. This is a red light also. People that work on screens, small screens for extended hours during the day, should stay away from anything that contains caffeine, because it is a vasoconstrictor. And the cortisol that it produces is also a vasoconstrictor. So you're making a bigger demand on your brain, and you're just sitting there, and so the body is sluggish. It's not moving your blood around. You're making a bigger demand on your brain. Your brain working, and you're drinking your coffee or drinking your tea, and you're diminishing the flow of the blood to the brain by about 27%, and diminishing the size of the blood vessels that are going to it. And so all of this makes for a perfect storm. The electrical activity of the brain is increased by your task that you're working on your computer doing, and you have less blood to do it with. And also because of the cortisol levels, because you're cranked, there are not things that are throwing the toxins out. Toxins like what? Toxins like the lead and cadmium that exist in all kinds of dark chocolates. So if it's a person, I love coffee and I love dark chocolate, that's a perfect storm. And I asked somebody, and what happens? Brain tumors happen, unsurprisingly, because the brain tumor is a try of the body to sequester the poisons that are in it, the toxins that are in it. The cadmium and lead, these are big players, and so it's trying to sequester them. I once asked our family physician, Dr. Nuh from Toronto. He says he's seen quite a few cancer cases in his time. I said, "Have you ever seen somebody with a brain cancer that lived?" And he said, "No." And he may not have seen everything, but they're very, very, very tough to work on. They're very, very tough to work on. They give them radiation, and they give them chemo, and gave me coffee, gave me tea, but she never gave me the jailhouse key. And nothing works. And it's very, very, very difficult. And so you're making a crisis for yourself when you're using this stuff that jazzes you up and gets you going on your task. And the endocrine system, the coffee tricks your body into panic mode with no real stressor. The caffeine in coffee stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, causing your adrenal glands to secrete cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. Daniels, 2018. Your heart rate and blood pressure elevates as stress hormones course through your body, even though there is no danger. The combination of chronic exposure to stress and elevated heart rate, high blood pressure, and continual neurovascular constriction are all a potent recipe for major cardiovascular problems as when you get older and vulnerable. A chronic caffeine-driven stress restricts basic endocrine hormonal function. Cortisol elevation caused by caffeine suppresses the production of hormones crucial for basic thyroid function. That's why the thyroid's no longer the boss when cortisol's ruling the roost. And the thyroid is critical. The thyroid is the one that should be doing the bossing the hormones around and getting them where they should go in the body. Especially the T-thyroid, for thyroid, the T3 hormone. The T3 hormone has a range of functions, including controlling metabolism and temperature, improving cell energy production, regulating menstrual cycles and fertility, improving oxygen and blood flow through the body, and affecting mood stability and brain development. Put simply, caffeine-induced cortisol creates a hormonal environment that chokes basic thyroid function over time, causing a range of harmful effects to your internal systems. In middle-aged women, caffeine can disrupt hormonal balance. Estrogen production, response, and metabolism are cardinal features of female development and aging. Excess caffeine consumption, particularly as women enter their menopausal transition, increases the risk of more toxic estrogen metabolic outcomes, which in turn increase the risk of DNA damage and cancers. I know, it's from Sisti et al. In 2015. Muscular skeletal system. High cortisol induced by caffeine can break you down from the inside out, as we mentioned. It eats all of the tissues. It's very corrosive. It corrodes the very insides of your veins and arteries. And what happens? How does the body try to take care of the problem? It slaps up patching material for the corrosion caused by the cortisol. And what is it? It's cholesterol. So elevated cholesterol is not a sign that it's just a mystery from another planet that shows that you're about to have a heart attack. It's the body's attempt at a solution for the corrosion that the cortisol has caused, roughing up and eating the inside of the veins and arteries. And so high cortisol can trigger a process called, they're called corticoidals, or gluconeogenesis, which converts your muscle and organ tissues into glucose for metabolic processes. As we said, it's hungry for blood sugar to fight the lion with, and it makes it out of anything. A relative of mine, younger than myself, got a hip replacement with titanium steel. And I couldn't figure it out. The very healthy, very healthy individual. So something destroyed his hip bone. And so I was trying to think, and I couldn't come up with an idea. And then it finally came to me. I don't know if somebody told me or not. But the fact is that his wife had died. A long, very difficult cancer, lung cancer thing, 3 years, where he was just, cranked, all the time. And cortisol, what did the cortisol do? It ate his hip bones. And he had to get a new hip bones, even though he was a younger guy. And so this is no joke. Cortisol kills. And cortisol is a product. So I know. The result, he said, at the same time, cortisol degrades collagen. What is it? The pads between your bones. Cortisol degrades collagen, weakening your joints. Collagen is all under your skin. That's what makes young skin look different than old skin, because the collagen vanishes as the people get older and older. They get wrinkles. And so as cortisol also degrades, it takes on collagen and degrades it, making that into sugar also, weakening your joints, skin, and connective tissue. And so the result, early aging, slower wound healing, fragile joints, hair thinning, and reduced skin elasticity. This is why the generalization that we heard in high school that all stimulants cause premature aging is true. They cause cortisol, and cortisol eats up the tissue in the body for its own purposes that are deranged when there's no threat. And this is what stimulants do. They make cortisol when there's no threat. Finally, metabolic systems. Caffeine tricks your body into overexertion. By reducing fatigue signals, ADP, while not affecting actual energy production, caffeine causes your body to burn reserve energy and masks true exhaustion. As ADP is restricted from reducing oxidative stress, the cascading effects of caffeine under chronic exposure though molecularly an antioxidant. They say, well, caffeine's an antioxidant. True, but compared to the things the forces it arouses in the body that chew it up, it could take a lot more than that to do anything. Makes it behave as an indirect pro-oxidant, especially when not balanced with melatonin production and adequate sleep. But sleep is all important. You should just write the number 7 in your diary and remember it. That's how many hours you should you should aim at. People that are under 20 years old probably need more than that. But for a golden medium, around 7. People perhaps between 6 and 8 is the truth. But 7 is very good advice, because it enables you to do all these things. That sleep is just as important as eating or drinking water or doing any other things. It's very important. The body is engineered to manage an occasional skipped night of sleep, but not night after night, because you're swilling down the coffee. And the cascading effects of caffeine under chronic exposure, particularly though molecularly, that they're prevented from having sufficient melatonin production and adequate sleep. Melatonin is another wonder hormone within your body. It doesn't just make you sleepy and cause sleep, although that's one of its functions, but rather it's one of the main immune players in the body of the utmost importance. That's why walking around under the sun is important also, because it's produced by the skin. And adequate sleep. Ironically, the very sleep that caffeine disturbs is crucial for the removal of the oxidative stress caused by caffeine-fueled ADP inhibition, and creating a vicious cycle leading to brain fog, mental aging, and memory loss. Note, an informed reader might object to highlighting studies demonstrating the antioxidant capacity of caffeine. In reality, there's no confusion here. While at the molecular structural level, caffeine may exhibit certain antioxidant properties, the effects described here are the biochemical, cellular, and systemic impacts of caffeine, all of which contribute to the oxidative stress caused by caffeine. And caffeine also interferes with your body's DNA repair systems, the things that repair the genes, leaving you more vulnerable to genetic damage from other sources. Your body has a complex system called nucleotide excision repair, NER pathway, which repairs genetic damage caused by cell phone radiation, UV light, and air pollution, all of which are ubiquitous in our times, all common in daily modern life. However, caffeine interferes with the NER pathway, the nucleotide excision repair pathway, which can slow DNA damage recovery and cause mutations to build up, raising the risk of tumors, cancer in the body. Nas'Allah tawfiq wa taysir. So anyway, I consider it a great benefit from Sheikh Abdul Rahman that he said, forget it. And I did. And nothing bad happened to me. And so Nas'Allah tawfiq wa taysir. Anyway, the idea is that the human being is greater than the universe. And it's comprehensive in its meaning with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Nas'Allah tawfiq wa taysir. Tahqiq fil masir. And so finally, studies about caffeine in our times, you have to know that science itself and scientific research has been much suborned by the fact that corporate financiers are running all of the Western countries. And so the kinds of things that get published that lead to more higher earnings and more vending of things. And so many of the studies and people that work in science and are conversant with the studies and what happens, there are howlers that are committed and high crimes and misdemeanors and forged evidence and all sorts of things. And so a few studies here and a few studies here can't approve or disprove a lot of things. But these are the basic facts about your body. And as for the spiritual side, I'm absolutely stunned and baffled and puzzled and stymied and about somebody who can drink a decent, dose of coffee and imagine that their mind can get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The nafs is just going on and on and on. It's like someone composed a song long ago and far away called, "I'd rather be the devil than be that woman's man." So Nas'Allah al-afiyah. Why give the nafs a rev up? And so it's just, continually speaking, why, look at your fingernails are getting longer and the time is getting shorter and this, that, and everything. It says all this stuff. All of this is beside the point. And we talked about stress and cortisol and so forth. We'll close by something about anti-stress. Anti-stress is the deep dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anti-stress is when you find Allah closer to you than yourself. Anti-stress is when you find the deep peace that can only be reached by knowing as-salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is Allah. Allah is as-salam. And so this is and it has many, many levels, but the practice makes perfect. And you're not going to reach it if you're cranking yourself up. I mean, if you want to try something out, make an experiment and put a Kodiak bear in your bedroom and then walk in there and see how long you can remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If your body's freaked out, it's not going to be able to focus. And the best way to prepare for dhikr is the way that the Prophet ﷺ himself prepared for dhikr, which is to get a little bit of sleep, get a modicum of sleep, and a qist, kafi, of sleep, and then get up and have your tahajjud and have your dua and have your dhikr, and it's very salubrious. And so this is, and believe me, Sheikh Abdul Rahman had enemies, and some of them said this, and some of them had said that, but everybody agreed that he was a Sufi. And as a Sufi, he certainly told us better than these stories about Yemeni Sufis, moving around all night on their coffee or whatever. It doesn't work like that exactly, or even approximately. You have to have peace, and you have to be a person of peace, and you have to steer around the rocks in your life. And so you're not cranked by anger and anxiety and other things that rev the system up and make you cause cortisol to surge through your blood and your veins and so forth. And so all of these things are absolutely essential to the spiritual life. And also from the point of view of what it does, the kind of we have. I'll finish with this note. So this is the second part two of the question. According to some scholars, coffee is served as a spark for the European Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution. It is deemed a civilizational gift from the Muslim world to Europe. Simultaneously, modern science increasingly promotes coffee because of money, their vending. And the European Enlightenment, I recently read a book about Thomas Carlyle, who was a great writer in the early 19th century, or middle 19th century in England. It talked about the intellectual scene. And coffee was very much, catching on and so forth and so forth. And I can say that I believe that the coffee mentality, somebody who is on coffee, is very different from the fitri way of ordinary people without coffee, like the Sahaba and like the Prophet and like the Awliya, from beginning to end. Their way was very different. Their mentality was very different. Now we have people that are running the earth that only know how to add and subtract. And America has become the pig of the world because it only knows its appetite. And even the industrialists that are running things in America are running them wrong. They don't have the supplies they need to make a war now. And they have to try to shop around for them elsewhere. Why? Because each one is just running their business for gain. And so all these people, they have this linear mentality, and I imagine that coffee has something to do with it, because all of them drink it. And it is the add and subtract mentality. The only point in life is to add to your fund of assets and money. And you subtract anybody who disagrees with your ability to add to what you have. And so this addition and subtraction is a big mess. And the world is a big mess, and in the consequence. The famous spider who was given caffeine and spun a really wacky web, and you can find it on the internet somewhere, has big gaps in it all over the place where it doesn't look like a healthy spider's web whatsoever. It looks like this is what our world looks like today. And it's because of linear thinking that only knows me and my gain, and the people that only know the dunya, because that's all the nafs talks about, is the dunya and its shahwat. And so it's the opposite. And so from all of the points of view, we need real spirituality, which is attachment of the heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it doesn't come through stimulants. And it doesn't come through somebody we have enough stressors in our life because they put all of these 5Gs and all of this radiation everywhere and that surround people. And it's hard enough to get a night of sleep. And so to add to it more grist to the mill of the nafs is stupid. And so this is, I wanted to say this word about coffee on the one side and infinity on the other side. And so that never shall the twain meet. That's what I'm saying. So go for infinity and give the coffee a miss. is what I suggested. نسأل الله التوفيق والتيسير والتحقيق في المسير والحمد لله رب العالمين. Inshallah, I'll take some of the questions next time, the other questions. That's 2 questions down, better than nothing. Alhamdulillah. So the Enlightenment was an endarkenment. As I remember from my readings of Friedrich Nietzsche in his book, Ecce Homo, this is in the Latin New Testament. People came and they asked for Jesus Christ to crucify him. And Pontius Pilate, the Roman ruler, he said, Ecce Homo. He said, behold the man, go take him. So Nietzsche made a title of one of his books, Ecce Homo. And in this book, he talked about himself and his own health regimen. And he said, and he was, by most of the people that speak German, he was considered the best stylist, certainly of the 19th century and probably of any century among the Germans, and a very capable writer indeed. He said, coffee spreads darkness. And I believe that this takes place at the level of the spirit, and at the level of the body, and at the level of geopolitical, the state of the world under 21st century capitalism. That's what Allah. There's no enlightenment. It was just an endarkenment. What they had with atheism and riba. And the basic problem is riba, and they're all too dead to it and too blind with it to see it. That's Allah tawfiq wa taysir wa tawfiq wa